There's a moment that happens to people like us, people who see things, people who understand things. You're sitting across from someone, maybe it's a friend who keeps canceling plans at the last minute, maybe it's a partner who shuts down every time you try to have a real conversation, maybe it's a family member who criticizes everything you do. And while they're hurting you, something else is happening in your mind. You're connecting the dots. Oh, they do this because their parents were never emotionally available. They're afraid of vulnerability because they were hurt before. They criticize me because deep down, they don't feel good enough themselves. You can see it all, the whole map of their pain, the patterns, the defenses, the wounded child hiding behind the hurtful adults. And because you can see it, you stay. You tolerate the behavior, you make excuses for them, you convince yourself that understanding them is enough, that your empathy will somehow heal what's broken. But here's what no one tells you about emotional intelligence. Understanding why someone hurts you doesn't mean you have to keep letting them do it. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most misunderstood aspects of emotional intelligence, the part that separates people who are merely empathetic from people who are truly emotionally intelligent. It's called discernment. And if you've ever found yourself trapped between your ability to understand someone and your need to protect yourself, this might be the most important thing you hear all week. Let's dive in. So let's start here. Empathy is beautiful. It's one of the most profoundly human things we can do, to step into someone else's shoes, to feel what they feel, to understand their world from the inside out. But somewhere along the way, many of us learned the wrong lesson about empathy. We learned that being a good person means always understanding, always giving the benefit of the doubt, always seeing the best in people even when they're showing us their worst. And if you're someone with high emotional intelligence, someone who naturally reads between the lines, who picks up on the things people don't say, who can sense the pain underneath the anger, you've probably fallen into what I call the empathy trap. Here's how it works. Someone treats you poorly. Maybe they snap at you for no reason. Maybe they ghost you after making plans. Maybe they say something that cuts deep, disguised as a joke. And instead of responding to what just happened, your mind immediately goes into detective mode. Why did they do that? You start gathering evidence. You remember that conversation 3 weeks ago where they mentioned their dad was critical. You recall how they seemed stressed at work. You piece together their childhood, their insecurities, their fears, and suddenly you've built them an entire case for their defense. You become their lawyer, their therapist, and their apologist, all without them asking you to be any of those things. This is a trap, because here's the thing about people like us, people who see patterns, who understand psychology, who can read emotional landscapes like maps. We're so good at understanding why that we forget to ask, so what? Let me give you an example. Imagine you have a friend. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah constantly makes plans with you and cancels last minute. Every single time she has a reason. She's overwhelmed with work, she's dealing with family drama, she's just so tired. And every single time, you understand. You know Sarah grew up with a mother who was unpredictable. You know she struggles with anxiety. You know that commitment feels scary to her because people have let her down before. So you tell yourself, she's not trying to hurt me, she's just struggling. And you're right, she probably isn't trying to hurt you. She probably is struggling. But here's the question that matters. Does understanding why she's doing it make you feel less hurt when you're sitting alone at that restaurant, checking your phone, realizing she's not coming again? Does knowing her backstory make the impact on your life any less real? This is where we confuse empathy with obligation. We think that because we can understand someone's behavior, we should tolerate it. We think that seeing someone's pain means we're not allowed to acknowledge our own. But understanding someone's reasons is not the same as accepting their behavior. And this is where a lot of us get stuck. We become what I call chronic understanders. We're so busy explaining everyone else's actions that we forget we're allowed to have standards. We're allowed to expect better. We're allowed to say, I see why you're doing this, and I still don't accept it. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Your empathy, as beautiful as it is, can become a cage. When you prioritize understanding over protecting yourself, you're not being emotionally intelligent. You're being emotionally available to everyone except yourself. You're giving away your peace, your time, your energy, and your self-respect, and calling it kindness. But real emotional intelligence, it asks a different question. Not just why are they doing this, but what am I willing to accept in my life? And that question, that distinction, changes everything. Because when you understand that emotional intelligence isn't just about seeing them clearly, it's also about seeing yourself clearly. You step out of the empathy trap. You step into discernment. So let's talk about what emotional intelligence actually is, because I think we've been sold an incomplete version of it. When most people think about emotional intelligence, they think about someone who's kind, understanding, patient, someone who doesn't lose their temper, someone who can handle difficult people with grace. And sure, those things can be part of emotional intelligence, but that's not the whole picture. Because if emotional intelligence just meant being nice and understanding, then every people pleaser, every person stuck in a toxic relationship, every chronic overextender would be emotionally intelligent. And we know that's not true. Real emotional intelligence has a component that's often overlooked. It's not just about understanding emotions, yours and others. It's about what you do with that understanding. It's about discernment. Discernment is the ability to judge well, to distinguish between what's true and what's manipulation, between what's your responsibility and what belongs to someone else, between empathy and enablement. Think of it this way. Emotional awareness is knowing that someone is hurting. Emotional intelligence is knowing that their hurt doesn't give them permission to hurt you. Emotional awareness says, I understand why they're acting this way. Emotional intelligence says, I understand why they're acting this way, and I know what I will and won't accept. See the difference? One is observation, the other is wisdom. Let me show you what this looks like in real life. Imagine you're in a relationship with someone who shuts down emotionally every time there's conflict. The moment you try to address something that's bothering you, they go silent. They withdraw. They make you feel like you're the problem for bringing it up. With emotional awareness, you can see what's happening. You recognize their shutdown as a defense mechanism. Maybe you even understand that they learned this from a family where emotions were dangerous, where speaking up led to punishment. You see all of that. But here's where emotional intelligence comes in. You can see all of that and still know that this pattern is damaging your relationship. You can understand their trauma and still recognize that their unwillingness to work on it is hurting you. Emotional intelligence doesn't ask you to choose between understanding them or protecting yourself. It asks you to do both. This is a two-part framework of real emotional intelligence. Part 1, understand the person, their wounds, their patterns, their context. Part 2, understand yourself, your needs, your boundaries, your limits. And here's the key. Part 2 doesn't cancel out Part 1. You don't have to stop understanding someone to start honoring yourself. You don't have to demonize them to set a boundary. You don't have to be cruel to be clear. In fact, the most emotionally intelligent people I've ever met are the ones who can hold two truths at the same time. I see your pain, and I will not allow your pain to become mine. I understand your struggle, and I expect you to take responsibility for your behavior. I have compassion for your journey, and I have standards for how I'm treated. This is what separates emotional intelligence from emotional servitude. Because when you only operate from Part 1, when you only see and understand others without considering yourself, you become a doormat with a psychology degree. You become someone who can explain everyone's behavior but can't seem to change your own circumstances. You become the person who knows exactly why everyone treats you the way they do, but somehow can't figure out why you keep accepting it. But when you add part two, when you bring yourself into the equation, everything changes. You stop being the person who just understands. You become the person who understands and acts accordingly. You become someone who can look at a situation and say, I see exactly why this is happening, I understand the psychology, I recognize the patterns, and based on all of that understanding, I'm choosing differently for myself. That's not coldness. That's not a lack of empathy. That's emotional intelligence in its fullest form. It's the ability to hold space for someone else's complexity while still protecting your own peace. To extend compassion without sacrificing your dignity. To be understanding without being a pushover. And when you start practicing this kind of emotional intelligence, the kind that includes you in the equation, you'll notice something interesting. The people who truly care about you, they'll respect your boundaries. They might not like them at first, they might push back, they might even get uncomfortable, but the people who genuinely value you will adjust. And the people who don't, well, that's information too. Now we need to talk about something that trips up a lot of emotionally intelligent people. It's this idea of responsibility. Specifically, what's yours to carry and what's theirs to heal. Because when you're someone who understands people deeply, it's really easy to blur these lines. You see someone's trauma and you think, if I just love them enough, if I'm just patient enough, if I just understand them well enough, they'll heal. You see their potential buried underneath all that pain, and you think your job is to dig it out for them. But here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. Someone else's healing is not your responsibility. I'll say it again because I know some of you need to hear it. Their healing is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to yourself, to your own well-being, to your own growth, to your own boundaries. Their responsibility is to themselves, and no amount of understanding, empathy, or unconditional love from you can do their healing work for them. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're in a friendship with someone, we'll call him Jake. Jake has a pattern of lashing out when he's stressed. He says cruel things and apologizes later, explaining that he's just overwhelmed. You understand. You know Jake grew up in a household where anger was the only emotion that was allowed. You know he never learned healthy ways to process stress. You've had deep conversations about this. He's even acknowledged that himself. So you forgive him. Again, and again, and again. Because you believe that your understanding is helping him, that your patience is creating a safe space for him to heal. But here's what's actually happening. Your tolerance of his behavior is removing his incentive to change. See, when you keep accepting someone's hurtful behavior, even with full understanding of why they do it, you're actually teaching them that the behavior works. You're showing them that they can lash out, apologize, explain their trauma, and everything goes back to normal. There's no real consequence, no real disruption, no urgent reason to do the hard work of change. And meanwhile, you're the one absorbing the impact. You're the one walking on eggshells, managing your words, shrinking yourself to avoid triggering their stress response. You've become so focused on understanding their pain that you've stopped acknowledging your own. This is the painful reality. Explaining someone's behavior doesn't erase its impact on you. Understanding why they do what they do doesn't make you immune to the harm. You can know exactly why someone keeps hurting you and still be hurt. And this is where we have to talk about the compassion paradox. Because it sounds harsh, right? It sounds like I'm saying you should stop caring about people's struggles, but that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is this: real compassion includes boundaries. In fact, boundaries are often the most compassionate thing you can offer, both to yourself and to the other person. Here's why. When you set a boundary with someone, when you say, I understand why you do this, but I'm not willing to accept it anymore, you're actually doing something powerful. You're handing the responsibility for their behavior back to them. You're saying, this is yours to work on, not mine to endure. And yes, that might feel uncomfortable. It might even feel mean. But consider what happens when you don't set that boundary. You continue absorbing their dysfunction. You continue sacrificing your peace, and they continue operating in a pattern that ultimately doesn't serve them either. Because here's the thing about patterns. They don't change when they're comfortable. They change when they become uncomfortable enough that change is the easier option. When you keep accommodating someone's hurtful behavior, you're actually preventing them from feeling the natural consequences that might motivate growth. You're protecting them from the discomfort that could spark their transformation. You think you're helping, but you're actually enabling. And I know that's hard to hear, especially if you're someone who genuinely cares about people, who wants to see the best in them, who believes in their potential. But love, real love, isn't just about understanding. It's about honoring reality. The reality is, you cannot heal someone else's wounds by letting them wound you. You cannot love someone into changing. You cannot understand them into becoming healthier. The only person who can do their healing work is them. And the most loving thing you can do, for both of you, is to make space for that truth. This doesn't mean you have to be cold. It doesn't mean you can't have compassion. It doesn't mean you're giving up on people. It means you're seeing the full picture. It means you're acknowledging that there's what's happening to them, what's happening to you, and what's within each person's power to change. You can care about someone deeply and still enforce boundaries. You can want the best for them and still refuse to sacrifice yourself. You can understand their struggle and still expect them to take responsibility for their behavior. In fact, that's not just allowed, that's wisdom. That's the difference between empathy and enmeshment, between supporting someone and losing yourself in their chaos, between genuine love and self-abandonment. Your pain matters just as much as theirs. Your healing matters just as much as theirs. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is step back and let them do their work while you do yours. Not because you don't care, but because you understand that some journeys can't be walked together. Let's get really honest for a moment, because there's something happening beneath all of this understanding and empathy that we need to name. When you consistently prioritize understanding someone else over protecting yourself, when you explain away behavior that hurts you, when you stay in situations that drain you because you can see why the other person acts the way they do, that's not emotional intelligence. That's not love. That's self-abandonment. And I know that might sting to hear because you've probably told yourself a different story. You've told yourself you're being patient, understanding, mature, compassionate. You've told yourself that walking away would be cruel, that setting boundaries would be selfish, that protecting yourself would mean you don't really care. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you extended that same level of understanding to yourself? When was the last time you made excuses for your needs the way you make excuses for their behavior? When was the last time you treated your own feelings with the same careful attention you give to theirs? Here's what self-abandonment looks like in real time. You feel hurt by something someone did, but instead of honoring that feeling, you immediately start justifying their actions. They didn't mean it. They're just going through a hard time. I am probably being too sensitive. You erase your own experience to preserve the relationship. Or maybe it looks like this. Someone repeatedly crosses your boundaries, and instead of enforcing consequences, you adjust your boundaries to accommodate their behavior. You make yourself smaller, more flexible, more understanding. You tell yourself this is growth, this is maturity, this is emotional intelligence. But really, you're just teaching yourself that your needs don't matter as much as keeping the peace. Or maybe it's this. You stay in a friendship, a relationship, a job, a family dynamic that consistently leaves you feeling depleted, disrespected, or unseen. And you stay because you understand why they are the way they are. You've done the work to see their trauma, their limitations, their struggles. But you haven't done the work to ask yourself, why am I willing to accept this? See, there's a belief that lives underneath all of this. It's quiet, it's sneaky, but it's there. The belief is this: if I just understand them enough, if I'm just patient enough, if I just love them well enough, things will change. They'll finally see how much I care. They'll finally do the work. They'll finally treat me the way I deserve. And so you stay, you tolerate, you explain, you endure. You become a perpetual student of their psychology while ignoring your own reality. But here's the heartbreaking truth. Understanding someone perfectly will not make them treat you better. Being endlessly patient will not inspire them to change. Sacrificing your needs will not make them suddenly value you. All it does is teach you to abandon yourself. It teaches you that other people's comfort is more important than your own well-being, that their feelings are more valid than yours, that being understanding is more valuable than being honored. And over time, this becomes your identity. You become the person who always understands, who always gives chances, who always sees the best in people. And you wear it like a badge of honor. But underneath that badge, you're exhausted, you're resentful, you're lonely. Because nobody's extending that same grace to you. Nobody's trying to understand your patterns, your pain, your reasons for being the way you are. You've become so good at being there for everyone else that you've forgotten how to be there for yourself. And the cruelest part, you've convinced yourself this is love, that this is what it means to be a good person, that setting boundaries would make you selfish, cold, unfeeling. But let me tell you what real love looks like. Real love doesn't ask you to disappear. Real love doesn't require you to silence your needs. Real love doesn't make you choose between understanding someone and protecting yourself. Real love, whether it's for a partner, a friend, a family member, or yourself, honors both people in the equation. It says, I see you and I see me, and we both matter. Anything less than that, that's not love. That's self-abandonment dressed up in empathy's clothing. So if you're someone who keeps finding themselves in situations where you're giving and giving and giving, if you're someone who can recite everyone else's trauma but can't seem to honor your own boundaries, if you're someone who's tired of being understanding and just wants to be understood, it's time to ask yourself a different question. Not why are they like this, but why am I accepting this? Because that question, that shift in focus, is where your power lives. That's where healing begins, not in understanding them better, but in choosing yourself. So here's the good news. You don't have to choose. You don't have to pick between being empathetic and being boundaried. You don't have to become cold or closed off to protect yourself. You can be both. You can be someone who understands deeply and someone who honors themselves fully. In fact, that combination, empathy with boundaries, is what real emotional intelligence looks like in action. So let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice. Because I know some of you are sitting here thinking, okay, this all makes sense, but how? How do I actually do this? First, let's get clear on what a boundary actually is. A boundary is not a punishment. It's not a wall. It's not you being mean or withholding or cold. A boundary is simply you communicating what you will and won't accept, and then following through with action when that line is crossed. It's information and integrity. Here's what that sounds like. Instead of saying, you always cancel on me and it's so frustrating, and then continuing to make plans, you say, I've noticed this pattern of last-minute cancellations, and I understand you're dealing with a lot, but it impacts me, so moving forward, I'm going to wait for you to reach out when you have capacity, rather than initiating plans. You're not attacking them, you're not making them wrong. You're acknowledging the pattern, honoring their struggle, and protecting your own peace. Or let's say someone keeps venting to you for hours, but never asks how you're doing. Instead of silently resenting them while continuing to be their emotional dumping ground, you say, I care about what you're going through, and I want to support you, but I'm realizing these conversations leave me feeling drained. Can we set a time limit or maybe alternate between talking about your stuff and mine? Again, you're not shutting them out. You're staying connected while also staying true to yourself. See the difference? You're holding space for their reality and yours at the same time. Here's another example, maybe one that hits closer to home. Let's say you're in a relationship with someone who shuts down during conflict. You understand why they do it, you've had the conversations, you know their history, but it's still damaging the relationship. Instead of continuing to tiptoe around issues or just accepting the shutdown, You say something like, "I know that conflict feels scary for you, and I understand why based on what you've shared with me. I'm not trying to attack you or make you wrong, but when you shut down, I feel alone and unheard, and that's not sustainable for me. I need us to find a way to navigate disagreements together. I'm willing to go to therapy, to read books, to learn tools, but I need you to be willing too, because I can't keep being the only one trying to bridge this gap." You're extending compassion, but you're also drawing a line. You're saying, "I see your pain and I have needs too." And here's what's beautiful about this approach. When you start showing up this way, with empathy and boundaries, you give other people the opportunity to rise to the occasion. You give them the chance to actually show you who they are. Because the people who truly value you, they'll hear you. They might be surprised at first. They might even be defensive initially. But if they genuinely care, they'll adjust, they'll reflect, they'll try. And the people who don't, the people who respond to your boundaries with manipulation, guilt tripping, or more of the same behavior, well, they have just shown you exactly who they are. And you can thank them for that clarity. Because that's the thing about boundaries. They're not just about keeping bad behavior out, they're about letting the right people in. They're about creating relationships where you don't have to constantly sacrifice yourself to maintain the connection, where understanding flows both ways, where empathy is mutual, not one-sided. So, if you're someone who's been all empathy and no boundaries, if you're someone who's been understanding everyone except yourself, here's what I want you to know. Setting boundaries doesn't make you less compassionate. It makes you more whole. It doesn't mean you care less about people. It means you finally started caring about yourself too. And when you operate from that place, when you can hold both truths at once, something shifts. You stop attracting people who need you to have no boundaries. You start attracting people who respect them. You stop losing yourself in other people's stories. You start writing your own. You become someone who can say, "I see you, I understand you, I have compassion for your journey, and I still choose me." That's not selfishness. That's not a lack of love. That's emotional intelligence in its truest, most powerful form. That's you finally understanding that empathy without boundaries isn't love. It's self-abandonment. And you deserve better than that. So, let's come back to where we started. You're someone who sees things. You understand people in ways that most don't. You can read between the lines, sense what's unspoken, connect dots that others miss. And that's a gift. It really is. But here's what I hope you take away from this. Your ability to understand someone else's pain, their patterns, their past, doesn't obligate you to tolerate how they treat you. You can hold compassion for someone's journey and still refuse to be collateral damage along the way. You can understand exactly why they are the way they are and still decide that's not what you're willing to accept in your life. You can see their complexity, their humanity, their struggle, and still choose yourself. Because at the end of the day, true emotional intelligence isn't just about understanding others. It's about understanding yourself well enough to know what you deserve. It's about having the discernment to distinguish between what's yours to carry and what's theirs to heal. It's about recognizing that empathy without boundaries isn't emotional intelligence. It isn't love. It's self-abandonment. It's self-abandonment. So I want to leave you with a question to sit with. Where in your life have you been choosing understanding over self-respect? Where have you been explaining someone's behavior instead of addressing its impact on you? Where have you been so focused on seeing them clearly that you've stopped seeing yourself at all? And then ask yourself this: what would it look like to honor both? To keep your empathy, your understanding, your ability to see people deeply, but to also honor your needs, your boundaries, your peace. What would it feel like to finally stop abandoning yourself in the name of understanding others? Because you don't have to become hard to protect yourself. You don't have to clothe your heart to keep yourself safe. You just have to remember that your heart deserves the same compassion you so freely give to everyone else. You deserve to be seen, honored, and respected, not just by others, but by yourself. And when you start living from that place, when you start showing up with empathy and boundaries, when you finally understand that protecting yourself isn't the opposite of loving others, everything changes. The right people will stay, the wrong ones will reveal themselves. And you'll finally stop carrying the weight of everyone else's healing on your shoulders. So here's to you, to your empathy, to your wisdom, and to finally choosing yourself. Not because you're giving up on understanding people, but because you finally understood that you matter too. Thanks for watching. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's all empathy and no boundaries, share this with them. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is remind each other that we're allowed to choose ourselves. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.